Picture this, an old man stands alone, no rank flashing on his chest, no ribbons pinned proudly, just a creased letter clutched in his weathered hand and a jacket so old it could tell tales older than the bustling crowd brushing past him. Can you imagine it? They told him to wait by the wall, didn't even bother scanning his name or asking who he was. To them, he was just another gray-haired nobody. But oh, how wrong they were. Behind that quiet, unassuming stance was a soldier, a warrior, who'd once led men through shadow missions the government still whispers about in locked rooms. And when the four-star general he saved decades ago realized this hero was stranded outside, one urgent call to the Pentagon stopped everything cold. What happened next? You'll never forget it. Welcome to Heartfelt Gratitude Stories, where we unearth tales of compassion and kindness that hit you right in the chest. Let's dive into what really went down that day. Sir, I'm going to need you to step to the side. This is a secure perimeter. The words came sharp and clipped from a young army captain, polite, sure, but practiced, like he'd said it 100 times that morning. He wasn't trying to be cruel, he was just a cog in the machine, keeping the line moving. The scanners buzzed, the crowd pressed forward, and the last thing he needed was some mystery guest gumming up the works. Henry Maddox, the old man standing before him, didn't argue. Why would he? He'd faced worse than a kid in a crisp uniform telling him to wait. With a soft breath, he took 2 quiet steps back, his scuffed shoes whispering against the tile, and settled near the cold marble wall. He folded that precious letter, his golden ticket, and slipped it back into the inside pocket of his ancient jacket. The crowd flowed on, a river of shiny shoes and pressed suits, and not one soul spared him a second glance. Inside the Pentagon's Visitor Center auditorium, the air crackled with excitement. Can you feel it? It was recognition day for the military's rising stars, bright-eyed officers from every branch, invited to a ceremony dripping with prestige. Stars gleamed on shoulders, uniforms snapped with perfection, and speeches echoed with words destined to linger in memory. This was an event where you were either somebody or nobody. And Henry Maddox? He wasn't on the somebody list. He'd arrived early, well before the VIPs strutted in, dressed in what he called his best, khaki trousers ironed stiff despite their faded threads, a pale button-down shirt softened by years, and that brown leather bomber jacket, its cuffs frayed, a tear at the shoulder hand-stitched long ago by someone he'd lost. His shoes, polished but worn thin, carried the weight of decades. In his hand, that folded envelope, yellowed and fragile, bore the seal of the Department of Defense and a signature, General Avery Cole. Not some form letter, but a personal plea for Henry to be there. Yet to Captain Jake Weston, it meant nothing. Weston, the gatekeeper of this grand affair, scrolled his iPad with military precision. Names glowed in neat rows, photos, QR codes, clearance levels, all accounted for. But Maddox, Henry? Nowhere to be found. No badge, no scan, no proof. So, he did what protocol demanded, a stiff apology, a line about an outdated invite, and a request to wait just until we can verify. 30 minutes ticked by, 30 long, lonely minutes. Weston moved on to the next VIP, Henry stayed rooted by that wall. The wind slipped through the cracks, nipping at his neck, but he stood tall, hands steady, eyes tracing the horizon like he was still on watch. He was used to waiting, through storms, through battles, through silence. Some guests noticed him, their polished shoes clicking past. A young lieutenant in a dress uniform smirked to his buddy, facility support, probably, or some VA outreach guy. They chuckled, their voices bouncing off the marble. Henry caught every word but didn't flinch. He'd heard worse, and besides, they weren't far off. 3 mornings a week, he swept floors and straightened chairs at the local veteran center, no pay, no thanks, just him and his quiet hands in that old jacket. But out here, by this wall, he wasn't invisible to everyone. Naomi Perez, a civilian intern juggling folders at the program table, kept stealing glances. Who was this guy? He wasn't lost, wasn't begging to get in, he was waiting, with a stillness that screamed purpose. She took a step toward him, but Weston cut her off. "Focus on the seating chart, Naomi. General Cole's almost here. Security's got that guy, he's not cleared." She frowned. "Did he say who invited him?" Weston shrugged. "Some old letter, no barcode. But he's still standing there." Naomi muttered, "Then he's got patience," and snuck one last look. Henry hadn't budged. Outside, Henry shifted his weight, his hip groaning under the strain. He wouldn't sit, not yet, not while hope flickered. He watched the line dwindle, watched staff usher in the last stragglers, watched 3 junior officers laugh at a phone screen, oblivious to the man who'd paved their way. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the letter again, its edges worn soft, creases deep from his thumb's grip. "Mr. Maddox, your presence at this year's ceremony would be an honor to me personally, General Avery Cole." He read it silently, folded it, and waited. Inside, the ceremony kicked off, applause roared, the MC's voice boomed, a Marine band hummed. But General Cole's aide whispered, still no visual on Mr. Maddox. Cole's eyes narrowed, scanning the room. "Where is he?" he demanded, voice low but steel hard. The aide tapped his tablet. "Not logged in. We thought he didn't show." Cole's gaze flicked to the doors. "He's here," he said, almost to himself, and slipped into the shadows. 40 minutes now, 40 minutes of standing by that wall, the cold seeping through Henry's thin soles, the autumn air biting at his knuckles. He didn't complain, he barely moved. Staying put was his defiance, his dignity. A grizzled security guard squinted at him. "That guy looks familiar," he muttered to a younger colleague. "Somebody's uncle, maybe," came the shrug. The older guard's mind flickered, a faded photo on a VA bulletin board, a name, Maddox. But he let it slide. Henry almost walked away then, his hips screaming, the silence crushing. But something caught his eye, a banner inside, Operation Dustlight Exhibit, Classified Heroes of the 20th Century. His breath hitched. He edged closer, peering through the glass. There it was, a map, yellowed and marked, tracing a mission he'd never forget, 1972, northern Syria. 12 men, no backup, just him leading them through hell, gunfire, screams, flashbangs. He'd saved them all, including a bleeding kid named Avery Cole, and never said a word about it since. Naomi finally broke away. "Sir, are you lost?" Henry's faint smile flickered. "Just waiting." She spotted the letter. "Is that an invitation?" He nodded. Before she could act, an officer waved her off. "He's not credentialed." Henry tipped his head. "It's okay, ma'am." But it wasn't, not to General Cole. Inside, he grabbed his phone, barking into it, "Clear Henry Maddox now. I invited him personally. Fix this." Then he stormed out, boots pounding. "Colonel Maddox." Henry turned, stunned, as Cole saluted him in front of everyone. "You were supposed to be inside, sir." "You're why I'm here." Henry's voice faltered. "Sir, no," Cole cut in, eyes shining. "You're why this day matters." He led Henry inside, the crowd parting, and the room erupted as Cole declared, "This is Lieutenant Colonel Henry Maddox, the man who saved my life. We left him outside today, but never again." Back in the present, Henry Maddox blinked away the memory like someone brushing snow from his shoulders. Can you imagine the weight of those years falling away in a single breath? The glass case stared back at him, cold and unfeeling, a sterile monument to a past he'd lived through but barely recognized. They'd written about Operation Dustlight now, safely sanitized years after declassification, stripped of the gut-wrenching panic, the sticky warmth of blood on his hands, and those bone-chilling nights where you slept with one eye open because dreams weren't safe. They got people killed. And the names? Still redacted, hidden away like shameful secrets. The story was told, sure, but the men who'd fought and bled? They were still ghosts, erased from the pages of history. How could they do that to him, to all of them? Behind him, a quiet voice broke through the silence, soft but piercing. "Sir, are you lost?" Oh, the kindness in that question. Henry turned his head just a fraction, and there she was, Naomi Perez, the intern from earlier, stepping closer with a cautious respect that warmed the air around her. Not patronizing, not performative, no, this was real, human connection in a place that felt so hollow. "You've been standing here for a long time," she said, her voice gentle like a whisper on the wind. "Can I help you find someone?" Can you feel the hope flickering in her words? Henry offered a faint smile, the kind that carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories, a smile that barely touched his eyes but spoke volumes. "Just waiting," he said, his voice low, steady, unshaken despite everything. Naomi's gaze dropped to the letter in his hand, worn at the edges, folded and unfolded so many times it looked like it might crumble. "Is that an invitation?" she asked, her curiosity sparking like a light in the dimness. Henry nodded, his fingers tightening around the paper as if it were a lifeline. She tilted her head, a question dancing in her eyes. "I don't think I've seen you on any list." But before she could say more, before that fragile thread of connection could grow, a uniformed officer strode up from behind, all youthful bravado and misplaced confidence. "Perez," he barked, his voice cutting through the moment like a jagged blade, "you don't need to worry about him. He's with maintenance." "Maintenance." Can you believe the audacity? Naomi frowned, her brow knitting with doubt. "He has a letter signed by General Cole," she protested, her voice firm but tinged with disbelief. "Okay," the officer snapped back, brushing her off like she was nothing, "but he's not credentialed. We've already been over it. Security flagged it. You've got assignments, let's move." His words were a slap, a dismissal that stung the air. Naomi hesitated, caught between duty and something deeper, her eyes flickering to Henry. The officer didn't wait, he turned and marched off, his boots clicking against the floor like a metronome of indifference. Henry said nothing, just gave her a small, resigned nod. "It's all right, ma'am," he murmured, but oh, how wrong he was, it wasn't all right at all. Inside the auditorium, the ceremony marched on like a well-oiled machine, one speaker after another, polished tributes, bursts of laughter, waves of polite applause. A young captain stood tall, reciting a speech about innovation and courage, words so crisp they could have been printed off a template. A colonel accepted a plaque with a rehearsed smile, nodding to his unit like it was all routine. And yet, through it all, General Avery Cole still hadn't entered the room. Backstage, his aide paced, nerves jangling as he checked his phone every few seconds, his thumb twitching like it could summon the general out of thin air. Naomi stood nearby, her heart pounding with a restless energy she couldn't name, her eyes darting between the hallway and the doors. She couldn't shake it, the way that old man's voice had sounded, worn and weathered but so grounded, like someone who'd carried a mountain on his back for decades and never once complained. Who was he, really? Back in the corridor, Henry let out a slow, measured breath, the kind that spoke of battles fought and lost, of quiet endurance. He looked at the envelope again, its words simple but heavy as stone, "Would be honored if you came." No fanfare, no promise of a reserved seat or security clearance, just a quiet plea from a man who hadn't forgotten. But did it even matter anymore? Had the general moved on? Don't people always move on? Henry hadn't come for himself, no, he came because part of him, deep down, needed to know, was there still a place in this army for men like him? Men who didn't shout their stories, didn't write books, didn't beg for medals, just men who once carried their brothers out of burning valleys, blood and smoke choking the air, and never breathed a word about it. Can you feel the ache in that question? He was about to turn away, his heart sinking with the familiar sting of being overlooked. He'd made peace with it long ago, or so he'd told himself. But then, the doors at the end of the corridor burst open, and everything, changed in an instant. The music faded, the lights dimmed, and General Avery Cole stepped onto the stage. Oh, what a sight! He moved with the quiet, unshakable power of a man who'd worn the uniform for 40 years, not stiff, not arrogant, just solid, like a rock standing firm against a storm. Every step was purposeful, every glance sharp as a blade. The audience rose in a ripple of polite applause, but he barely acknowledged it, just a curt nod, no wave, no smile. He wasn't here for them, no, he was here for something bigger. Behind him, a banner unfurled from the ceiling with a dramatic flourish, Emerging Military Leaders Recognition Ceremony. The room buzzed with life, decorated officers, civilian VIPs, foreign attaches, young cadets in crisp uniforms, all shining with pride. But General Cole's eyes weren't on them, they were searching, restless, hunting for someone else. He scanned the front row, then the second, then the back, his face a mask of calm but his shoulders betraying a flicker of tension, a wrinkle of worry creasing his brow. He turned, his voice low and urgent, "Where is he?" Where was who? The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Stepping back from the podium, his eyes narrowed, and with a sharp flick of his hand, he summoned an aide from the side curtain. A young lieutenant hurried over, snapping to attention. "Sir," he said, breathless. Cole's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a fire barely contained. "There should be an elderly man here, gray hair, bomber jacket, walks with a limp. He was supposed to be here. He's why I came." Can you hear the urgency in his words? The aide blinked, thrown off balance. "Named, sir." "Henry Maddox," Cole said, the name dropping like a stone into still water. The aide fumbled with his tablet, fingers flying across the screen in a frantic dance. No one by that name was issued a formal credential, no clearance issued, no seating record, nothing logged, he stammered, his voice shrinking. Cole's face hardened, his jaw tightening like steel. "Check security," he ordered, and the air crackled with his resolve. "Yes, sir." The aide stepped away, whispering urgently into his comms mic. Seconds stretched into eternity, the tension building, then he returned, pale as a ghost. "Sir, security reports a man matching that description was stopped near the south gate, no badge, dressed informally. They told him to stand aside." He swallowed hard, barely daring to finish. "They assumed he was with facility support." Cole's eyes snapped toward him, cold and unyielding. Can you imagine the fury behind that gaze? Without a word, he reached into his uniform jacket and pulled out his encrypted government phone, his movements precise, deliberate. He turned his back to the stage, dialed, and the room held its breath. The ceremony droned on around him, oblivious, but in that moment, the world had shifted on its axis. The call connected on the first ring. "This is General Cole," he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "I need immediate clearance override on one Henry Maddox, full recognition protocol." A pause, agonizing, electric. "Yes, Lieutenant Colonel, retired, yes, Operation Dustlight." He was cleared for attendance by personal invitation. Security turned him away. Another pause, longer, heavier. "No, I'm not requesting it, I'm activating it, effective immediately. Issue digital validation and route it to all auditorium control posts, and hold the program. I'm going to get him myself." He hung up, the click echoing like a gunshot. Inside the auditorium, the MC's voice buzzed on, announcing the next honoree. A young Navy officer rose to accept a plaque, but General Cole was already moving. Oh, how he moved. He stepped off the stage, his stride brisk and unstoppable, cutting through the side aisle toward the exit. His aide tried to follow, but Cole waved him off with a sharp gesture. "I said, I'm going." And he was gone, a force of nature unleashed. Down at the south gate, the breeze had picked up, carrying the sharp bite of autumn through the air. Henry Maddox was preparing to leave, his hip throbbing with every step, the hollow ache in his chest heavier than any burden he'd ever borne. He didn't regret coming, not really, but oh, how it hurt to have hoped. Just as he turned toward the exit, the outer doors flew open behind him. Boot steps rang out, quick, sharp, determined, and then a voice cut through the silence, Colonel Maddox. Clear as a bell, strong as iron. Henry turned, and there he was, General Avery Cole, alone, no entourage, no fanfare, just him. And the look in his eyes? It wasn't polite or formal, it was raw, unguarded, the look of a man who'd been pulled from death's grip and had never forgotten who saved him. "Sir," Cole said, stopping just a few feet away, "you were supposed to be inside." His voice trembled with something fierce, gratitude, maybe, or guilt. Henry opened his mouth, but words failed him. What could he possibly say? Cole straightened, and then, in a moment that stopped time itself, he raised his right hand and saluted, a full, crisp military salute, right there in the hallway. The aide at the checkpoint stared, wide-eyed, frozen. Younger officers nearby fell silent, their chatter dying in an instant. Henry, caught off guard, stood taller than he had in years and returned the salute. His hand trembled, but the motion was perfect, etched into his soul. Can you feel _no such element exception the honor in that gesture? Cole lowered his hand, his voice soft but steady as a heartbeat. I invited you to be part of this ceremony, not as a guest, as the reason it exists. The words landed like a thunderbolt. Henry blinked, his throat tight. Sir. No, Cole cut in, his eyes shining with something deep and unspoken. I owe you more than words. Come with me. He turned, holding the door open, a silent command wrapped in a plea. Henry hesitated for a heartbeat, then followed, his steps slow but sure, a quiet dignity in every movement. Inside the auditorium, a ripple of whispers spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed, aides leaned toward their superiors, murmuring urgently. Then the rear doors swung wide, and every head turned. Can you picture it? General Cole walked down the center aisle, not alone. Beside him, an old man in a bomber jacket, shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes clear and bright as the dawn. The whispers stopped. The MC faltered mid-sentence. A colonel in the front row froze, his hands caught in mid-clap. General Cole stepped back onto the stage, guiding Henry gently to stand beside him. Oh, the tenderness in that gesture. He took the microphone, ignoring the script, the crowd, the protocol. He looked out over the sea of faces and said, before I continue this program, I need to correct something that should have never happened in this building. His voice rang with a quiet fury. He glanced at Henry, then back at the crowd. This man standing beside me is Lieutenant Colonel Henry Maddox, retired, U.S. Army Special Operations, 1971 to 1986, recipient of multiple classified honors, commander of Task Force Dustlight. Gasps echoed through the room, one man's jaw dropped, a young Marine stood instinctively, then sank back into his seat, stunned. General Cole's voice grew stronger, richer. In 1972, I was a 19-year-old private, wounded, bleeding out, pinned under fire with no comms, no cover, and no future. This man carried me out, carried 2 others while wounded himself, then refused evacuation until all 12 of his men were accounted for. He turned to Henry, his voice cracking just once, raw with emotion. He saved my life. And today, we left him standing outside this auditorium. How could they? The silence was deafening, no one moved, no one breathed, the weight of his words pressing down on every soul in the room. Cole straightened, his gaze sweeping the auditorium like a lighthouse beam. I asked him to come here so I could say, on record, that the army I serve in today still remembers the ones who never asked to be remembered. His words were a vow, a promise unbroken. He stepped aside, turning to Henry with a reverence that filled the air. Sir, would you honor us by taking your place on this stage? Henry looked out at the crowd, not judgment, not pity, but faces, young and old, grateful and humbled. He nodded once, took a step forward, then another, his heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. The MC, struggling to hold it together, approached the podium and cleared his throat. I believe, ladies and gentlemen, we have a new first honoree for tonight's ceremony." His voice wavered with awe. Applause broke, soft at first, then swelling, rising until the walls of the Pentagon auditorium trembled, not from force, but from pure, unfiltered recognition. "Can you hear it, the sound of justice finally ringing true?" Henry Maddox's story cuts deep, stirring a raw mix of admiration and frustration in me. His lifestyle, humbly volunteering at a veteran center, sweeping floors while the world looks past him, ignites a fierce respect. It's not just inspiring, it's a quiet rebellion against a society obsessed with flash and fame. I feel a pang of sorrow, too, knowing that such devotion often fades into the background, drowned out by louder, shinier displays of valor. Why does it take a ceremony for us to see what's been there all along? The social views in this tale hit harder still. I'm angered by the dismissive glances from young officers, the cold efficiency of security reducing Henry to facility support. It's a gut-wrenching mirror to our world, where age and wisdom are too often discarded like yesterday's news. I feel the sting of that neglect personally. It's a betrayal of the sacrifices that built us. We owe more than indifference to those who've carried the weight silently. But it's the call to honor quiet heroism that grips me most. General Cole's salute, voice trembling with gratitude, feels like a plea to my own conscience. Wake up, look closer. I'm moved to tears by the thought of unnoticed Henrys everywhere, and it fuels a resolve in me. We must seek them out, celebrate them, not with parades, but with simple, heartfelt recognition. Their quiet strength is the heartbeat of our humanity, and I refuse to let it fade. Subscribe to Heartfelt Gratitude Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost. Let's keep these stories alive, together.